My name is Evelyn Marie Carter, and I'm 67 years old. I'm sitting here in my modest kitchen, the one with the lace curtains my mother stitched by hand, their delicate threads now yellowed with time. I've never been one for cameras, never thought I'd be the type to bare my soul to strangers on a screen. But some stories demand to be told, not for vengeance or pride, but because silence can weigh heavier than heartbreak. I want you to see me not as the woman they mocked, not as the mother they discarded, but as the woman who learned to rise again, even when her world was crumbling. 2 summers ago, my life changed at my son Michael's wedding. I'd spent months dreaming of that day, imagining the way his smile would light up the room, the same crooked grin his father Tom used to flash when he was happy. Michael was my only child born when I was 22, in a cramped apartment with peeling wallpaper and a secondhand crib. We'd painted blue. Tom and I were young, scraping by, but we poured every hope into our boy. Tom's been gone 7 years now. Cancer stole him too soon. And since then, Michael became my everything. I was a school teacher for 38 years, shaping young minds with patience and care. But my truest work was being Michael's mother. I saved every dime, skipped new dresses, cooked meals from scratch, all so he could have the chances I never did. When he proposed to Lauren, his fiancée, I offered my life savings $82,000 for their wedding. It was every penny I'd scraped together, but I wanted their day to be a memory they'd cherish, a perfect start to their life together. The wedding was at Rosewood Manor, an elegant estate with crystal chandeliers that shimmered like constellations and gardens heavy with the scent of honeysuckle. I'd chosen it myself, spending hours on the phone with the manager negotiating every detail. I paid the deposit from my savings, signing the contract with a steady hand, proud to give my son something beautiful. For the occasion, I bought a lavender dress, simple but graceful, with a soft hem that swayed when I moved. I wore Tom's old watch, its leather strap worn but warm against my wrist, a quiet reminder of the man who'd loved me fiercely. In the mirror, I thought I looked nice, maybe even youthful, though the lines on my face told a different story. I didn't mind the gray in my hair or the way my hands trembled slightly. I felt alive, ready to celebrate the boy I'd raised. The ceremony was breathtaking. Michael stood tall in his charcoal suit, his eyes bright with nervous joy. Lauren glowed in her white gown, her laughter like a bell. I sat in the front row, clutching a tissue, my heart so full I could barely breathe. No one asked me to give a speech, and Lauren's mother seemed to command the spotlight, but I didn't mind. I was there witnessing my son's happiness, and that was enough. I dabbed my eyes, whispering thanks to Tom's memory for letting me see this day. The vows were spoken, the rings exchanged, and I clapped until my palms stung my smile wide, despite the ache of being a widow in a moment meant for two. Then came the reception, held in a grand ballroom with tall windows and a polished oak floor. The band played old standard songs Tom and I used to sway to in our tiny living room back when love felt endless. I'd always loved dancing, though I hadn't in years, not since Tom's illness tethered us to hospital rooms and quiet nights. When the band struck up Moon River, something stirred deep inside me. Maybe it was the glass of wine I'd sipped, or the way the soft lights blurred the edges of the room, but I felt a spark of joy I'd almost forgotten. I stepped onto the dance floor, alone, my lavender dress, brushing my knees, and began to sway. I closed my eyes, arms outstretched, as if Tom were there, his hand in mine, guiding me through the steps. The music wrapped around me, and for a moment, I was weightless, the girl I'd been at 25, dancing with her love, unafraid of the world. Then I heard it, a sharp, cruel laugh. My eyes snapped open, and there was Lauren's sister Jessica pointing at me from the edge of the dance floor. Her face was twisted in mockery, her voice loud enough to cut through the music. "Look at Evelyn thinking she's 20, she said, her words dripping with disdain. Heads turned, guests pausing their conversations to stare. I felt my cheeks flush, but I kept moving, pretending I hadn't heard, hoping the moment would pass. Michael was nearby, standing with Lauren, his arm around her waist. I looked to him, my son, the boy I'd carried through fevers and heartaches, waiting for him to say something, anything to defend me. But he didn't. He whispered to Lauren, and she smirked her eyes, flicking over me like I was a stranger. The laughter grew a chorus of giggles from the younger guests, each one a needle in my heart. Jessica's voice rang out again, sharper this time. "Evelyn, act your age. You're embarrassing yourself." The words landed like a blow, stealing my breath. I stopped dancing, my arms falling limp, the music fading into a dull hum. The room felt impossibly large, every eye pinning me in place. I was 67, not 20, not even 40. Was I foolish to think I could dance to feel alive? Had I misread my place in this world in my son's life? I looked at Michael again, pleading silently for him to see me, to remember who I was. But his jaw was tight, his gaze fixed on the floor. Lauren tugged his arm, murmuring, "Let's go," and they turned away, leaving me alone on the dance floor, exposed and unwanted. My legs moved before my mind caught up. I stumbled toward the bathroom, my heels clicking on the marble floor, each step heavier than the last. Inside, I locked the door and collapsed against the sink, my reflection staring back at me, gray hair pinned neatly, lavender dress, now creased eyes brimming with tears. I pressed my hands to my face, muffling the sobs that tore through me, raw and relentless. I cried for the girl I'd been, who danced without fear. I cried for the mother I'd tried to be, giving everything to a son who now turned away. I cried for the widow who thought she still had a family, a purpose. The bathroom walls seemed to close in the air, thick with my grief. I stayed there until my throat was raw, until my tears left streaks on the lavender fabric. When I finally stepped out, the reception was in full swing. The cake was being cut, Michael and Lauren laughing as they smeared frosting on each other's faces. No one noticed I'd been gone, not a single soul. I slipped into a corner, invisible, my joy replaced by a hollow ache that settled in my bones. I stayed until the end because that's what mothers do even when their hearts are breaking. When I hugged Michael goodbye, my voice was steady, though it cost me everything. "I'm so proud of you," I said, and he nodded, distracted already, turning back to Lauren. I drove home alone, the radio silent, the darkness outside mirroring the one inside me. The next morning, my phone rang, jarring me from a sleepless haze. It was the manager at Rosewood Manor, his voice tight with concern. "Mrs. Carter, there's a problem with the final payment for the wedding." The check was declined. I froze my coffee mug, trembling in my hand. I hadn't declined anything. I'd paid the deposit, signed every paper, insured, every detail was perfect. But in that moment, something shifted, a spark of defiance, a whisper of the woman I'd buried beneath years of sacrifice. I took a deep breath, my voice calm but firm. "Let me handle it," I said. And that, my friends, was when the tide began to turn. I hung up the phone, the manager's words still ringing in my ears. The check was declined. My kitchen felt smaller, the lace curtains casting frail shadows on the table, where I'd raised Michael, where I'd bandaged his scraped knees and helped him with spelling tests. I sat there, my coffee cold, staring at Tom's watch on my wrist. Its faint ticking was the only sound, steady and unyielding, like a heartbeat from a life I'd lost. I should have been furious, or at least confused, but instead, a strange calm settled over me. It wasn't peace, not yet, but a quiet resolve, like the moment before a storm breaks. I'd given everything for that wedding, my savings, my pride, my heart, and they'd laughed. They'd turned me into a stranger in my own son's story, but I wasn't done yet. I drove to the bank that morning, the summer air heavy with humidity. The teller, a young woman with kind eyes, confirmed what I already suspected. The final payment to Rosewood Manor hadn't gone through because the account was frozen. Not by me, but by an error, a clerical mix-up. She said something about the large withdrawal for the deposit, triggering a fraud alert. I could fix it with a signature, she assured me, sliding a form across the counter. I held the pen, its weight, heavier than it should have been. I could sign release the funds and let the wedding fade into memory, along with the laughter and the sting of Michael's silence. Or I could wait. I could let the Manor's call go unanswered, let the consequences unfold. For the first time in years, I felt a flicker of power, not the loud, vengeful kind, but the quiet strength of a woman who'd been invisible too long. I didn't sign. I thanked the teller, folded the form into my purse, and left. The decision wasn't made out of spite, though I won't pretend I wasn't hurt. It was something deeper, a need to reclaim a piece of myself, to stop being the mother who gave until she was empty. I drove home, my hands steady on the wheel, and for the rest of the day, I didn't answer my phone. Michael called twice, Lauren, once their voicemails clipped and impatient, asking about the payment. I listened to them in silence, then deleted each one. I wasn't ready to face them, not yet. I needed time to remember who I was before I was Michael's mother, before I was Tom's widow, before I was the woman they mocked for dancing. That evening, I pulled a box from the attic, one I hadn't opened since Tom's funeral. Inside were old photos, letters, and a journal I'd kept in my 20s, its pages yellowed but filled with my handwriting. Dreams of traveling, of painting, of a life I'd set aside for family. I sat on the floor, surrounded by memories, and read until midnight. There was a photo of me at 25, laughing on a beach, my hair wild in the wind. I barely recognized her, that girl who believed the world was hers. I traced her smile with my finger, tears falling onto the glossy print. I'd given so much to Michael, to Tom, to everyone, but what had I given myself? When had I stopped being Evelyn, the woman who danced without shame? The next morning, I walked to the community center down the street. I'd passed it 1,000 times, always meaning to stop in, but life had a way of pulling me elsewhere. The bulletin board was cluttered with flyers, book clubs, yoga, a painting class. I signed up for the painting class on a whim, my hand shaking as I wrote my name. The instructor, a woman named Clara with silver hair and a warm smile, greeted me like an old friend. "You're going to love this," she said, handing me a brush. I hadn't painted since high school, but as I dipped the brush into blue acrylic, something loosened in my chest. The canvas didn't judge me. It didn't laugh or tell me to act my age. It simply waited for me to create. Clara became a lifeline in those early weeks. She was 72, a widow like me, but her eyes sparkled with a fire I envied. Over coffee after class, she listened as I poured out my story, the wedding, the laughter, Michael's silence. I hadn't meant to tell her, but the words spilled out raw and unfiltered. She didn't offer platitudes or tell me to forgive. Instead, she squeezed my hand and said, "Evelyn, you're not just a mother. You're a woman with a story, and it's not over." Her words were a balm, stitching up a wound I hadn't realized was still bleeding. I started going to the center daily, not just for painting, but for the company, Clara, the other women, the quiet hum of a space where I wasn't invisible. At home, the calls from Michael and Lauren grew more frequent, their tones sharper. The Manor was threatening to charge late fees, they said. Why hadn't I fixed it? I listened to their messages, my heart twisting, but I didn't call back. Instead, I went to my lawyer, a kind man named Mr. Ellison who'd handled Tom's estate. I asked him to review the wedding contract and my finances. He raised an eyebrow when I told him about the declined payment, but didn't pry. "You've got options, Evelyn," he said, spreading papers across his desk. Options. The word felt foreign, like a language I'd forgotten. I'd spent decades making choices for others, but now I had options. Mr. Ellison revealed something I hadn't known. The mortgage on Rosewood Manor was held by a trust Tom had set up years ago, one I controlled as his beneficiary. I'd never paid attention to it, trusting Tom's investments to sit quietly in the background. But there it was, in black and white, my name, my signature, my power. The Manor wasn't just a venue I'd paid for. It was a place I held sway over. I sat back stunned, the weight of it sinking in. I could let the payment go through, or I could let the trust intervene, delaying everything. I didn't decide then, but I left his office with a folder of documents and a seed of possibility. Back home, I started small acts of defiance. I wore brighter colors, reds and yellows I'd avoided for years, thinking they were too bold for a woman my age. I danced in my living room, the radio playing Moon River, my bare feet soft on the rug. I painted canvases filled with blues and golds, each stroke a piece of myself reclaimed. Clara hung one in the community center, and when a stranger offered to buy it, I cried not from sadness, but from the shock of being seen. I didn't sell it, but I kept painting, filling my house with color. I was waking up slowly like a flower after a long winter. Michael showed up one evening unannounced, his face tight with frustration. "Mom, what's going on with the payment?" he asked, pacing my kitchen. "The Manor's calling us every day. Lauren's humiliated." I looked at him. My son, the boy I'd loved beyond reason, and saw a stranger. He didn't ask how I was, didn't mention the wedding, didn't see the paintings on my walls. I wanted to scream to ask why he'd let them laugh, why he'd turned away. Instead, I said, "I'm handling it. Michael." My voice was calm, but inside I was trembling. He sighed, exasperated, and left without a hug. I stood at the door watching his car disappear and felt a new kind of loneliness, not the ache of loss, but the quiet of standing alone and finding it bearable. Clara invited me to a women's group at the center, a circle of widows and retirees who shared stories over tea. I was nervous, my hands clutching my mug, but they welcomed me like family. One woman, Rose, spoke of her daughter cutting her off after a fight over money. Another, Lila, told of selling her house to escape her ungrateful son. Their stories mirrored mine, each one a thread in a tapestry of women who'd been discarded but refused to break. I told them about the wedding, my voice cracking as I described the dance, the laughter, Michael's silence. They listened, their eyes soft with understanding, and when I finished, Rose said, "You're stronger than you know, Evelyn. Don't let them steal your light." I went home that night and slept soundly for the first time in weeks. The folder from Mr. Ellison sat on my table, its contents whispering possibilities. I hadn't signed the bank form, hadn't released the payment. The Manor's calls had stopped, replaced by letters addressed to the trust, my trust. I wasn't ready to act, not yet, but I was learning to wait, to listen to the woman inside me, who was tired of being small. I painted, I danced, I laughed with Clara and the women at the center. I was Evelyn Marie Carter, and I was beginning to remember what that meant. The days blurred into weeks, each one a small step away from the woman I'd been at the wedding, the one who'd crumbled in the bathroom, her lavender dress stained with tears. I was still Evelyn, still 67, still a mother, but I was becoming something else, too, someone who didn't need permission to exist. My kitchen, once a shrine to Michael's childhood, was now a studio of sorts, its table covered with paintbrushes and half-finished canvases. The lace curtains caught the morning light, and I'd sit there with my coffee Tom's watch ticking softly, feeling the weight of my own choices for the first time in years. I hadn't answered Michael's calls, hadn't signed the bank form, hadn't released the payment to Rosewood Manor. The folder from Mr. Ellison sat untouched, but its presence was a quiet promise, a reminder that I held power I'd never claimed. Clara and the women at the community center became my anchor. The painting class had grown into a ritual each session, a chance to spill my heart onto canvas. I painted oceans stormy and vast, their waves crashing against cliffs I imagined as my own resilience. Clara hung another of my pieces in the center's hallway, and when a local gallery owner offered to display it, I laughed, thinking it was a joke. But Clara's eyes were serious. "Evelyn, your work speaks," she said. "Let it." I hesitated, my old fears whispering that I was too old, too ordinary. But I said yes, and a week later, my painting hung in a small gallery downtown, its frame catching the light like a beacon. Strangers left notes calling it haunting and alive. I read them in disbelief, my heart swelling with a pride I hadn't felt since Michael was a boy, holding up his first spelling test with a gold star. The women's group at the center grew closer, our tea-stained mugs a testament to hours spent sharing truths. Rose, with her sharp wit, told me how she'd sold her car to fund her daughter's college, only to be ignored once the degree was earned. Lila, soft-spoken but fierce, described rewriting her will to leave her estate to a women's shelter after her son demanded she move to a nursing home. Their stories wove into mine, each one a mirror reflecting my own hurt, my own strength. I told them about the manner, the declined payment, the trust I hadn't known I controlled. They listened, their faces a mix of shock and admiration. "You're playing chess." Evelyn Rose said, her eyes gleaming, "And they don't even know you're on the board." I smiled, but inside I wasn't sure if I was playing or simply surviving. Michael's visits became rarer, his texts curt. "Mom, the manners threatening legal action. Fix this." I read them without replying, my silence a shield I hadn't known I could wield. Lauren sent a long email, her tone dripping with blame, accusing me of ruining their memories. I deleted it, my fingers steady. The guilt was there, a dull ache, but it was overshadowed by something new, a clarity that I wasn't responsible for their happiness, not anymore. I'd given them a wedding, my life savings, my love, and they'd repaid me with laughter and dismissal. I wasn't angry, not exactly. I was tired of being the mother who faded into the background, the widow who existed only to serve. One afternoon, I walked to the park near my house, a place I'd taken Michael as a child. The swings were empty, the air crisp with the first hint of fall. I sat on a bench watching leaves drift to the ground and pulled out my old journal from the attic box. Its pages held dreams I'd forgotten, traveling to Paris, opening a small art shop, learning to play the piano. I'd set them aside for Tom, for Michael, for a life that demanded sacrifice. But now, with the journal open in my lap, I wrote a new entry. I want to live. I wrote the words bold against the faded paper. Not for them, but for me. I sat there until dusk, the sky bruising purple, and felt a shift like a door creaking open after years of being locked. I started making changes, small at first. I sold Tom's old car, a rusted sedan I'd kept for sentiment, and used the money to buy a used piano. It arrived on a rainy morning, its keys slightly out of tune, but full of possibility. I found a teacher, a retired musician named Henry, who came to my house twice a week. He was patient, his hands gnarled but nimble, guiding mine across the keys. I played haltingly, my fingers clumsy, but each note was a victory. I practiced Moon River, the song from the wedding, reclaiming it from the laughter that had tainted it. The music filled my house, drowning out the silence of Michael's absence. Clara invited me to a local art fair where I set up a small booth with my paintings. I was terrified, my stomach knotted as strangers browsed. But they stopped, they looked, they asked questions. A woman my age bought a canvas, saying it reminded her of her late mother's strength. A young man, barely 20, said my work made him feel less alone. I sold 3 pieces that day, the money modest, but the meaning immense. I wasn't just Evelyn, the mother who'd been mocked. I was Evelyn the artist, the woman whose heart spoke through color and light. Mr. Ellison called one morning, his voice cautious. The Manor had contacted the trust demanding payment or threatening to sue. He'd stalled them, citing legal technicalities, but they were growing impatient. "You need to decide, Evelyn," he said. "The trust gives you leverage, but it's a big step." I thanked him, promising to think it over. That night, I spread the trust documents across my table, their legal jargon a map of power I was only beginning to understand. The Manor's mortgage was mine to influence a fact Michael and Lauren didn't know. I could release the funds, end the dispute, and fade back into their narrative. Or I could hold firm, let the truth of my control surface, and force them to see me. I didn't decide yet, but I took another step. I visited a financial advisor, a woman recommended by Lila, who helped me reorganize my savings. I'd given Michael everything, but I still had Social Security, a small pension, and the trust's income. She showed me how to invest in myself, a modest fund for travel, a savings account for emergencies, a budget for art supplies. It wasn't wealth, but it was freedom. I booked a solo trip to a coastal town 3 hours away, a place I'd always wanted to visit. I told Clara, expecting her to cheer, but she hugged me instead, her eyes wet. "You're blooming, Evelyn," she said. "Don't stop." Michael showed up again, this time with Lauren. They stood in my living room, their faces a mix of anger and desperation. "Mom, this is serious," Michael said, his voice sharp. "The Manor's talking about lawsuits. You're humiliating us." Lauren crossed her arms, her eyes cold. "We didn't ask for your money to have it thrown back in our faces." I looked at them, my son and his wife, and saw strangers who'd forgotten I was human. I wanted to tell them about the laughter, the bathroom, the way their silence had shattered me. Instead, I said, "I'm handling it." My voice was calm, but my hands shook Tom's watch heavy on my wrist. They left, slamming the door, and I stood in the quiet, my heart racing but unbroken. The women's group met that evening, and I told them everything: Michael's visit, the trust, my paintings, the piano. They listened, their faces fierce with pride. Rose raised her mug and said to Evelyn, who's rewriting her story, "We toasted the clink of ceramic, a small rebellion." I went home and played Moon River on the piano, the notes wobbly but mine. I danced my bare feet soft on the rug, the memory of the wedding fading into something new, a promise to myself. The folder from Mr. Ellison glowed in the lamplight, its secrets waiting. I wasn't ready to open it, not yet, but I was closer. I was learning to stand, to speak, to be Evelyn Marie Carter, not just a mother, not just a widow, but a woman with a life still unfolding. The Manor could wait. Michael could wait. For now, I was painting, playing, living, and that was enough. The coastal town was called Haven's End, a place of salt-worn cottages and beaches that stretched like open arms. I arrived on a gray morning, my suitcase light, but my heart heavy with possibility. It was my first trip alone, booked with the money from selling Tom's car, a quiet act of courage that felt both reckless and right. I checked into a small inn, its walls painted a faded blue, and the owner, a woman named Marjorie, handed me a key with a smile that crinkled her eyes. "You look like you're here to find something," she said. I nodded, unsure what I was seeking, but certain I'd know it when it came. Haven's End was my first step into a world I'd only dreamed of in my journal, a world where I was Evelyn, not just Michael's mother or Tom's widow. I spent my days wandering. The beach was my favorite, its waves a steady rhythm that drowned out the noise of my thoughts. I walked barefoot, the sand cool between my toes, collecting shells in a canvas bag. Each one was a treasure, spiraled conchs, smooth scallops, a tiny starfish I held like a secret. I sketched them in a notebook, my pencil tracing their curves, blending memory with imagination. At night, I sat on the inn's porch, listening to the ocean, and played Moon River in my mind, the notes clearer now thanks to Henry's piano lessons. I was 67, but out here age was just a number, not a cage. Marjorie became a friend, her stories filling the gaps in my own. She was 70, a former nurse who'd bought the inn after her husband died. I didn't want to be the woman who faded, she told me over tea, her voice steady. So I built this. Her words echoed Clara's, Rose's, Lila's women who'd refused to let loss define them. I told her about the wedding, the laughter, the declined payment still hanging over Rosewood Manor. She listened, her hands wrapped around her mug, and when I finished, she said, "You're not running, Evelyn. You're choosing." I carried her words back to my room where I wrote them in my journal, the pages filling with a new story mine. Back home, the community center buzzed with energy. My painting had sold at the gallery, and the owner invited me to a small exhibition. I hesitated, my old fears whispering that I didn't belong, but Clara's voice was louder. "You're an artist, Evelyn. Own it." I wore a red dress to the event, bold and unapologetic, Tom's watch glinting on my wrist. Strangers shook my hand, asked about my work, and for the first time I didn't shrink. I stood tall, my voice steady as I described the oceans I'd painted, the storms I'd survived. A local newspaper ran a story about the exhibition, calling me a late-blooming talent. I framed the article not for vanity, but as proof I was more than the woman they'd laughed at. The piano lessons continued, my fingers growing surer. Henry taught me chords, simple at first, then richer layered sounds that felt like painting with music. I played Moon River until it was smooth each note, a reclaiming of the dance floor I'd fled. One evening, Henry brought his guitar and we played together, the music spilling through my open windows. Neighbors stopped to listen, clapping when we finished, and I laughed, my cheeks warm with joy. I was alive, not just existing, and every note, every brushstroke was a brick in the foundation I was building. Michael's calls had stopped, replaced by a single letter, handwritten and formal. He and Lauren demanded I resolve the Manor's payment, threatening legal action if I didn't. "You're our mother," he wrote, "but this is unacceptable." The words stung, but they didn't break me. I saw them for what they were, a plea from a son who'd taken me for granted, who thought I'd always bend. I folded the letter and tucked it into the folder from Mr. Ellison, its weight a reminder of the power I held. I wasn't ready to act, but I was preparing, gathering strength like shells on the beach. I visited Mr. Ellison again, this time with questions. He explained the trust in detail Tom had invested in properties, including Rosewood Manor's mortgage, to secure our future. As the beneficiary, I could influence the trust's actions, even foreclose if I chose. The idea was staggering, not because I wanted revenge, but because it meant I wasn't powerless. I asked him to draft a letter to the Manor, not to settle the payment, but to assert the trust's position. "Let them know who's in control," I said, my voice firm. He nodded, a faint smile on his lips, and promised to handle it. I left his office feeling lighter, as if I'd shed a layer of the woman who'd cried in the bathroom. At the women's group, I shared my trip to Haven's End, the exhibition, the letter to the Manor. The room erupted in cheers, Rose banging her mug on the table like a gavel. "You're a force, Evelyn," she said, and the others nodded, their eyes bright with pride. I told them about Marjorie, about the shells, about the music. Lila, usually quiet, reached for my hand. "You're not just surviving," she said. "You're thriving." Their belief in me was a mirror reflecting a woman I was only beginning to know. I went home and painted a new canvas, a woman dancing in a storm, her dress red, her arms wide, unafraid. I started volunteering at the community center, teaching a beginner's art class for seniors. My students were like me, retirees, widows, people who'd thought their best days were behind them. I showed them how to hold a brush, how to let color tell their stories. One woman, Grace, painted a garden to honor her late daughter. Another, Sam, painted a car he'd driven in his youth. Their courage fed mine, and I realized I wasn't just teaching, I was learning how to lead, how to be seen. The center's director asked me to organize an art show for the students, and I said yes, my heart racing with purpose. One evening, I found a voicemail from Lauren's sister, Jessica, the one who'd mocked me at the wedding. Her voice was syrupy, apologetic, but it rang false. "We're sorry if you felt hurt, Evelyn," she said. "Let's fix this Manor thing as a family." I deleted it, my hand steady. Her words weren't remorse. They were strategy, a reaction to the trust's letter. I saw through them, and it felt like freedom. I played the piano that night, the music loud and defiant, my fingers dancing across the keys. I was done being small, done apologizing for existing. The art show was a success, the center packed with families and friends. My students beamed as strangers admired their work, and I stood in the background, my red dress bright against the white walls. Clara hung one of my paintings, a woman by the sea, her face turned to the sky, and when it sold, I donated the money to the center. It wasn't about the dollars. It was about giving back, about building something that wasn't tied to Michael or the past. I went home and wrote in my journal, "I am enough." The words felt true, not just a hope, but a fact. The folder from Mr. Ellison sat on my table, its contents a quiet hum of possibility. The manor had responded to the trust's letter, their tone less demanding, more cautious. They knew I held the mortgage, and with it, their future. I didn't want to destroy them, but I wanted them to see me not as the mother who paid, but as the woman who could choose. I called Mr. Ellison and asked him to arrange a meeting with the manor's owners, not to settle, but to discuss terms. "I want them to know my name," I said. He agreed, his voice warm with respect. Warm. I stood in my living room, the piano silent, the paintings glowing in the lamplight. I danced slow and deliberate to a song only I could hear. The wedding, the laughter. Michael's silence, they were still there, but they were smaller now, overshadowed by the woman I was becoming. I was Evelyn Marie Carter, and I was ready to step into the light. The meeting with Rosewood Manor's owners was set for a Tuesday morning, and I spent the days leading up to it in a quiet kind of preparation, not just for them, but for myself. My house was alive now, its walls lined with paintings, the piano a steady presence in the corner, its keys worn from my daily practice. I'd wake early, make coffee, and sit by the lace curtains, watching the light shift through their delicate threads. Tom's watch ticked on my wrist, a reminder of the life we'd built, but also of the life I was building now, one that didn't depend on his memory or Michael's approval. I was 67, and for the first time I felt the weight of my own name, Evelyn Marie Carter, not as a mother or widow, but as a woman with choices. I met Clara for lunch the day before the meeting at a cafe near the community center. She wore a bright scarf, her silver hair catching the sunlight, and her presence was like a warm fire on a cold day. I told her about the meeting, about the trust, about the power I hadn't known I held. She listened, her eyes sharp, and when I finished, she leaned forward. "Evelyn, you're not just going to that meeting for the manor," she said. "You're going for every time they made you feel small." Her words settled into me heavy and true. I wasn't seeking revenge, but I was done being invisible. I wanted them to see me, to know I was more than the woman they'd laughed at on the dance floor. The morning of the meeting, I chose a navy dress, simple but sharp, with a silver brooch Tom had given me on our 10th anniversary. I looked in the mirror, my gray hair pinned neatly, my eyes clear, despite the nerves twisting my stomach. I wasn't the Evelyn who'd cried in the bathroom, her lavender dress crumpled with shame. I was someone new, someone who'd painted oceans, played Moon River, walked beaches alone, and found shells that whispered of resilience. Mr. Ellison met me at his office, his briefcase stuffed with documents, and we drove to the manor together. The estate looked different in daylight, its chandeliers dim, its gardens quiet. It was just a place, not the shrine of my son's betrayal, and that realization steadied me. The owners, a married couple named the Harpers, greeted us in a wood-paneled office. They were polite but tense, their smiles thin as they offered coffee I didn't take. Mr. Ellison laid out the situation, the declined payment, the trust's control over their mortgage, the legal leverage we held. I sat silently at first, letting him speak, my hands folded in my lap. Mrs. Harper, a woman in her 50s with sharp eyes, leaned forward. "Mrs. Carter? We're confused," she said. "You paid the deposit, signed the contract. Why the delay?" Her tone wasn't cruel, but it carried an edge, as if I were a problem to be solved. I took a breath, my voice steady when I spoke. I paid for my son's wedding with everything I had, I said. $82,000, my life savings. I chose this place because I wanted it to be perfect for him. But that night, I was mocked for dancing, for being alive. My son stood by and let it happen. I'm not delaying out of spite, but because I'm deciding what my money, my name means now. The room went quiet, the Harpers exchanging glances. Mr. Harper cleared his throat, his voice softer. "We didn't know," he said, "but the payment issue is causing real problems for us." I nodded, meeting his eyes. "I understand, and I'll decide soon." But I need you to know who I am not just as the woman who paid, but as the woman who holds your mortgage. The words felt like a release not of anger, but of truth. Mr. Ellison added that the trust could delay foreclosure proceedings, giving us time to negotiate. The Harpers promised to review their records and respond their tone more respectful now. As we left, Mr. Ellison touched my arm. "You were remarkable, Evelyn," he said. I smiled, but inside I was trembling, not from fear, but from the weight of claiming my place. I drove home the manor, fading in my rearview mirror, and played the piano that night, the notes of Moon River filling the house with a quiet triumph. The art show for my students was the next week, and I poured myself into it, arranging canvases, printing programs, hanging fairy lights in the community center's hall. My students were nervous, their hands fluttering as they explained their work to visitors. Grace's garden painting glowed under the lights, Sam's car drawing smiles from strangers. I wore my red dress, the one I'd worn to the gallery, and moved through the crowd, my heart full. A local reporter interviewed me, asking how I'd inspired my students. I just showed them they're enough. I said the words, surprising me with their truth. The reporter nodded, scribbling, and I realized I was speaking to myself as much as to her. Clara and the women's group came their cheers the loudest in the room. Rose bought one of Grace's paintings. Lila hugged me until I laughed. After the show, we sat in the center's kitchen sharing wine and stories. I told them about the manor meeting, the way the Harpers' faces had shifted when I spoke. "You're a queen," Evelyn Rose said, raising her glass. "They thought they could push you, but you pushed back." I blushed, but her words sank deep. I wasn't a queen, not yet, but I was learning to stand like one. Michael sent another letter, this one, angrier, accusing me of sabotaging their marriage. "You're not the mother I thought you were," he wrote. The words cut, but they didn't bleed like they would have before. I saw them as his truth, not mine. I tucked the letter into the folder, its pages growing thick with evidence of my shift. Lauren called once, her voice icy, demanding I meet them to resolve this like adults. I didn't call back. Instead, I went to Haven's End again, a weekend escape to clear my mind. I walked the beach, sketched the waves, and ate dinner with Marjorie, who'd hung one of my shell sketches in her inn. "You're leaving a mark, Evelyn," she said. I smiled, believing her. Back home, I started a new painting, a woman in a navy dress standing in a storm, her face calm. It was me, not as I'd been, but as I was becoming. The community center offered me a paid teaching position, and I accepted my first steady income in years. I used it to buy better art supplies, to tune the piano, to plan another trip this time, to a painting retreat in the mountains. Henry, my piano teacher, suggested I perform at the center's holiday recital. I laughed, thinking I wasn't ready, but he insisted. "You're ready for more than you know," he said. I practiced every night, my fingers finding strength I didn't know they had. One evening, I opened the folder from Mr. Ellison, its contents no longer daunting but familiar. The manor had sent a new offer proposing a payment plan to settle the debt without involving the trust. It was a concession, a sign they knew I held power. I called Mr. Ellison, asking him to arrange another meeting, this time with Michael and Lauren present. "I want them to hear it from me," I said. He agreed, his voice warm with pride. I wasn't sure what I'd say, but I knew it would be my truth, not theirs. The women's group met the next day, and I told them about the recital, the new meeting, the painting of the woman in the storm. They listened, their faces glowing. Lila, usually reserved, said, "You're not just taking back your life, Evelyn, you're giving us permission to take back ours." Her words stayed with me, a reminder that my story wasn't just mine, it was theirs too. I went home and practiced for the recital, the piano's notes, a bridge between the woman I'd been and the woman I was becoming. I danced in my living room, the red dress swishing the laughter from the wedding, a distant echo drowned out by my own music. The holiday recital was a week away, and I practiced Moon River until my fingers ached, each note, a thread weaving together the girl I'd been and the woman I was now. My living room, once a museum of Michael's childhood, was now a sanctuary of my own making. paintings on the walls, the piano's warm wood catching the lamplight shells from Haven's End scattered on the windowsill. I'd wake each morning to the soft ticking of Tom's watch, my coffee steaming by the lace curtains, and feel a quiet pride in the life I was carving out. The folder from Mr. Ellison sat on my table, its contents a map of the power I'd claimed, but I wasn't focused on the manner or Michael's demands. I was focused on the recital on standing before a room of strangers and friends, playing a song that had once broken me and now set me free. Clara helped me prepare, insisting I wear the red dress for the performance. "It's your color, Evelyn," she said, her eyes twinkling. "It says you're here, and you're not hiding." I laughed, but I agreed, trying it on in my bedroom, the mirror reflecting a woman I was beginning to love. The community center was buzzing with plans for the recital decorations, a potluck, a program with my name listed alongside Henry's and the other performers. I was nervous, my stomach fluttering, but it wasn't the fear of failure. It was the thrill of being seen not as Michael's mother or Tom's widow, but as Evelyn, the woman who played painted and lived. The meeting with the manor's owners, Michael and Lauren, was scheduled for the day after the recital. Mr. Ellison had arranged it at his office neutral ground, and I spent hours thinking about what I'd say. I didn't want to shout or accuse. I wanted them to understand not just the money, but the cost of their laughter, their silence. I wrote in my journal pages filled with words I might never speak aloud but needed to release. I gave you everything, Michael, but I didn't give myself. I'm doing that now. Writing was like painting each stroke a step toward clarity. I wasn't seeking revenge, but I was seeking truth, and I was ready to speak it. The women's group at the center became my sounding board. I told them about the recital, the meeting, the way Moon River felt different now, not a memory of shame, but a declaration of strength. Rose, always bold, said, "You're not just playing a song, Evelyn, you're telling them who you are." Lila, softer but no less fierce, added, "And who you are is enough." Their words were a shield protecting me from the doubt that crept in at night when Michael's letters and Lauren's cold voicemails echoed in my mind. I wasn't alone anymore. I had Clara, Rose, Lila, Marjorie, Henry, a family I'd built not born. I visited Haven's End one more time before the recital, a quick overnight to clear my head. The beach was colder now, the waves sharper, but I walked it anyway, my coat buttoned tight. I found a shell, small and perfect, its surface smooth as glass. I tucked it into my pocket, a talisman for the days ahead. Marjorie and I had dinner at the inn, and I showed her a photo of my latest painting, a woman playing a piano, her face lit by stars. "That's you." Marjorie said, her voice warm, not just surviving, but shining. I smiled, believing her, and drove home the next day with the shell in my hand, its weight a reminder of my own resilience. The recital was on a Saturday evening, the community center transformed with twinkle lights and folding chairs arranged in neat rows. My students from the art class were there, their faces proud, and the women's group sat in the front rows, waving a program like a flag. I wore the red dress, Tom's watch glinting on my wrist, and when Henry called my name, I walked to the piano, my heart pounding, but my hands steady. The room quieted, and I began to play Moon River. The notes soft at first, then stronger, each one a piece of my story. I saw the wedding in my mind, the dance floor, the laughter, Michael's silence, but it didn't hurt. It was just a moment, not my truth. The music filled the room, and I felt the audience with me, their breaths matching mine. I played for the girl I'd been, who danced with Tom in a tiny apartment. I played for the mother who'd given everything even when it cost her. I played for the woman I was now who'd found her voice in paint and sound. When I finished, the room was silent for a heartbeat, then erupted in applause. I stood my cheeks warm and saw Clara crying, Rose cheering, Lila clapping with both hands. Henry hugged me, whispering, "You were magic." I laughed, tears in my eyes, and knew I'd done more than play a song. I'd claimed my place, Afterward, at the potluck, strangers shook my hand, saying the music moved them. Grace, my student, gave me a small painting of a piano, her gift for inspiring her. I hung it in my living room next to my own work, a reminder that we were all creating, all healing. That night, I slept deeply, the shell from Haven's End on my nightstand, the red dress draped over a chair. I was ready for the meeting, not because I had all the answers, but because I had myself. The next morning, I drove to Mr. Ellison's office, the folder in my purse, the navy dress from the first Manor meeting, crisp and pressed. Michael and Lauren were already there when I arrived, sitting across from the Harpers, their faces tight with frustration. Michael's eyes met mine, but he looked away quickly, his jaw set. Lauren's gaze was colder, her arms crossed. The Harpers nodded politely, their tension palpable. Mr. Ellison began summarizing the situation, the declined payment, the trust's control, the Manor's offer of a payment plan. Then he turned to me. "Mrs. Carter, would you like to speak?" I took a breath, the room shrinking to the space between me and my truth. "I paid for your wedding, Michael." I said, my voice calm but firm. $82,000, every penny I'd saved. I did it because I loved you, because I wanted your happiness. But that night when I danced, you let them laugh. You let them tell me to act my age, to be less than I am. You didn't see me not as your mother, not as a woman. I'm not here to punish you, but I'm done being invisible. The trust I control holds the Manor's mortgage. I could have paid the balance months ago, but I needed you to know what it cost me, not just the money, but my heart. The room was silent. Michael's face pale, Lauren's eyes wide. Mrs. Harper spoke softly. "Mrs. Carter, we had no idea about the wedding. We're willing to work with you." I nodded, turning to Michael. "I'll settle the payment," I said, "but not because you demanded it. Because I choose to, and because I'm worth more than your silence." I looked at Lauren, then Jessica, who'd slipped into the room late, her face flushed. "I'm not the woman you mocked anymore. I'm Evelyn Marie Carter, and I'm enough." Mr. Ellison outlined a plan: release the payment, waive late fees, and protect the trust's interests. The Harpers agreed, their relief evident. Michael tried to speak, his voice low, but I raised a hand. "Not now," I said. "I need time." I left the room, Mr. Ellison at my side, the folder lighter in my purse. Outside, I breathed deeply, the air sharp with winter's promise. I'd spoken my truth, not with anger, but with dignity, and it felt like flying. Back home, I played the piano, the notes of Moon River, a quiet celebration. I painted, taught, laughed with Clara and the women's group. I was building a life, not just for me, but for the Evelyn who'd been waiting all along. The Manor was settled, but my story wasn't. I was still writing it, one note, one brushstroke, one day at a time. The meeting at Mr. Ellison's office lingered in my mind like a painting, half finished, its colors vivid, but its edges undefined. I'd spoken, my truth stood tall in my navy dress, and walked away with a dignity I hadn't known I possessed. But as I drove home, the weight of Michael's silence, Lauren's cold stare, and Jessica's flushed embarrassment settled into me. Not as pain, not anymore, but as a quiet ache, a reminder of the family I'd loved and the family I'd lost. My house welcomed me back, its walls alive with paintings, the piano waiting like an old friend. I sat at the keys playing Moon River softly, the notes a bridge between the woman I'd been and the woman I was becoming. I was 67, and I was Evelyn Marie Carter. Not just a mother, not just a widow, but a woman whose story was still unfolding. The days after the meeting were calm, a gentle rhythm of teaching, painting, and living. The community center was my haven, its halls filled with the laughter of my students and the warmth of Clara's encouragement. I taught my art class with a new confidence guiding hands that trembled with age or doubt, showing them how to turn memory into color. Grace, my student who'd painted the garden, brought me a small pot of lavender, saying it reminded her of my strength. I placed it on my windowsill next to the shells from Haven's End and watered it daily, a symbol of growth I could touch. The women's group met twice a week, now our mugs stained with tea, our stories weaving a tapestry of resilience. Rose called me the general for my handling of the manor, and I laughed, but her pride fed mine. Michael didn't call, and I didn't expect him to. The settlement with the manor had gone through. Mr. Ellison confirmed the payment was cleared, the trust's leverage intact. The Harpers sent a formal letter thanking me for my generosity and inviting me to a future event at the manor, a gesture I tucked away without responding. I didn't need their gratitude. I'd done it for me to close a chapter without bitterness. But the silence from Michael and Lauren was louder than any letter. I found his last note, the one accusing me of not being the mother he thought, and read it again. The words didn't cut as they had before. They were his truth, not mine, and I was learning to let them go. One morning, I received a call from the gallery owner who'd displayed my work. She wanted to feature me in a spring exhibition, not as a local talent, but as a guest artist, with a solo room for my paintings. I was stunned, my voice catching, as I said yes. Clara came over that evening, bringing wine and a notebook to plan. "This is your moment, Evelyn," she said, her eyes shining. "Not just for you, but for all of us who've been told we're too old to matter." We sketched ideas for the exhibition: ocean storms, women dancing pianos under stars. I painted late into the night, my hands steady each canvas, a piece of my heart made visible. The gallery's offer was a validation not of my talent, but of my existence, and I held it close. Henry, my piano teacher, suggested I write my own piece for the next recital, something to follow Moon River. I hesitated, thinking composition was beyond me, but he was insistent. "You've got a story in you, Evelyn," he said. "Let it sing." I started small, tinkering with chords, letting memories guide my fingers. The melody was simple, a blend of the beach at Haven's End and the quiet of my kitchen at dawn. I called it Tide's Return, a nod to the waves that had carried me through. Practicing it felt like writing in my journal, each note a word I'd been too afraid to speak. I played it for Clara, who cried, saying it felt like hope. I wasn't sure it was ready, but I was ready to try. The spring exhibition was announced in the local paper, my name in bold, alongside a photo of me in the red dress standing by my painting of the woman in the storm. The article called me a testament to reinvention, and I framed it, hanging it beside the one from the first exhibition. Strangers stopped me at the community center, congratulating me, their kindness a reminder that I wasn't alone. But the article reached further than I expected. One evening, Jessica Lauren's sister showed up at my door, her face pale, a newspaper clipping in her hand. "Evelyn, can we talk?" she asked, her voice unsteady. I let her in, more curious than angry, and we sat at my kitchen table, the lavender plant casting shadows on the lace curtains. She apologized for the wedding, her words halting, her eyes avoiding mine. "I didn't mean to hurt you," she said. I was caught up in the moment. I listened, my hands folded, Tom's watch ticking softly. Her apology was sincere, but it was also late, and I saw it for what it was, a reaction to my rising to the article, to the truth of my power. "I hear you, Jessica," I said, my voice calm. "But apologies don't erase pain. They just open the door to healing, and that's on me, not you." She nodded, tears in her eyes, and left. I didn't feel triumphant, but I felt free. The exhibition was a month away, and I threw myself into it, painting larger canvases, each one bolder than the last. One was of a woman in a red dress, dancing alone, her face turned to the sky, a love letter to the Evelyn who'd reclaimed the dance floor. Another was of the piano, its keys glowing under a moonlit window, a tribute to Tide's Return. The gallery owner visited, her excitement contagious, and we arranged the room's layout, my paintings, telling a story of loss, strength, joy. I invited my students, the women's group, Marjorie, even Henry, wanting them to share in what I'd built. Then came the moment I hadn't expected. Michael called, his voice hesitant, asking to meet. I agreed, but on my terms at the community center after my art class. He arrived as my students were leaving, their laughter fading down the hall. He looked older, his shoulders slumped, and for a moment I saw the boy I'd raised, not the man who'd turned away. "Mom," he said, "I'm sorry. I didn't know how much I hurt you." His words were raw, but they weren't enough, not yet. I looked at him. "My son," and felt love, but also distance. "I needed you to see me, Michael," I said. "Not just as your mother, but as a person. I'm not the same woman I was, and I'm not sure who we are to each other now." He nodded, his eyes wet, and asked about the exhibition. I told him about it, about the paintings, the recital, the life I'd built. He listened, something he hadn't done in years, and when he left, he hugged me, a tentative gesture I didn't fully return. I watched him go, the shell from Haven's End in my pocket, and felt a quiet peace. I wasn't ready to forgive, but I was ready to let go, to let my story be mine, not ours. The exhibition opened on a crisp spring evening, the gallery packed with faces familiar and new. My paintings glowed under the lights, each one a chapter of my journey. Clara, Rose, Lila, Marjorie, Henry. They were all there, their pride, a warmth I could feel. I wore the red dress, Tom's watch, and a smile that came from within. Strangers bought my work, their notes tucked into my journal. But the real gift was the room itself, a space where I was seen, not as the woman who'd been mocked, but as Evelyn, the artist, the survivor, the creator. That night I played Tide's Return at the recital, the notes carrying my story to the stars. The applause was thunderous, but the quiet after was mine. I was Evelyn Marie Carter, and I was whole, not because they saw me, but because I did. The exhibition's success lingered like the afterglow of a sunset, its warmth settling into my bones. I woke each morning to a house that felt like mine, not a museum of Michael's childhood or Tom's absence, but a canvas of my own creation. The paintings on my walls told my story: storms, oceans, women dancing under stars, and the piano stood proud, its keys worn from Moon River and Tide's Return. The lavender plant from Grace thrived on my windowsill, its scent mingling with the salt of shells from Haven's End. I was 67, and I was Evelyn Marie Carter, a woman who'd learned to live not for others, but for herself. The folder from Mr. Ellison, once a weight, was now just paper. Its power exercised, its purpose served. The matter was settled, Michael's apology spoken, but my story wasn't about them anymore. It was about me, and it wasn't over. I taught my art class with a new ease, my students' faces, a mirror of my own rediscovery. Grace painted a new garden brighter this time, and Sam finished a portrait of his wife, his hands trembling with pride. I guided them gently, but they taught me too how to trust the brush, how to let go of perfection. The community center offered me a permanent teaching role, and I accepted the small paycheck, a symbol of my independence. I used it to buy a plane ticket to the painting retreat in the mountains, a dream from my journal I was finally claiming. Clara helped me plan her excitement, infectious, and we spent evenings laughing over wine-sketching itineraries, like schoolgirls planning a grand adventure. The women's group remained my anchor, our tea-stained mugs, a testament to stories shared and strength found. Rose, Lila, and the others celebrated my exhibition, framing the newspaper article and hanging it in the center's hall. They called me their muse, but they were mine. Each woman a reminder that we could bloom at any age in any season. I told them about Michael's visit, his apology, and the distance I still felt. Rose, ever fierce, said, "You don't owe him your heart, Evelyn. You've earned your peace." Lila, softer, added, "And you've given him a chance to grow whether he takes it or not." Their words freed me not from love, but from the need to fix what wasn't mine to repair. I performed Tide's Return at the community center's summer concert, a smaller event than the recital, but no less meaningful. Henry played guitar beside me, our music blending like old friends. The audience was modest, my students, the women's group, a few neighbors, but their applause felt like a homecoming. Afterward, a young girl, maybe 10, asked if I could teach her piano. I hesitated, then said yes, realizing I had more to give, not as a mother or widow, but as a woman with gifts to share. Her name was Sophie, and her eager fingers on my piano brought a joy I hadn't expected, a new thread in my story. Michael reached out again this time with a letter, not a demand, but a reflection. He wrote about the wedding, admitting he'd been ashamed not of me, but of his own failure to act. I didn't know how to be your son and Lauren's husband, he wrote. I'm still learning. It wasn't a full apology, but it was honest, and I respected that. I didn't reply, not yet, but I kept the letter, tucking it into my journal, not the folder of pain. I loved him, always would, but I no longer needed him to define me. Lauren sent a card, brief and formal, congratulating me on the exhibition. I set it aside, its words polite but distant, a gesture I neither needed nor rejected. The painting retreat was in July, a week in the Blue Ridge Mountains, surrounded by artists of all ages. I arrived nervous, my suitcase packed with brushes, and the shell from Haven's End for courage. The mountains were breathtaking, their peaks, softening my edges, and the other painters welcomed me like family. I painted landscapes, misty valleys, rivers catching dawn's light, each one a piece of my heart. At night, we shared stories by a fire, and I told mine, not the whole of it, but enough: the wedding, the laughter, the piano, the sea. A woman my age, a sculptor, took my hand and said, "You're proof we don't stop growing." I cried, not from sadness, but from the truth of her words. Back home, I hung my mountain paintings, their greens and blues, a contrast to the stormy oceans of before. I taught Sophie piano, her laughter filling my house, and continued my art classes, the center, now planning a fall showcase for all its programs. I volunteered to lead it, surprising myself with my boldness. Clara called me a force, and I began to believe her. I wasn't just surviving. I was creating, not just for me, but for everyone who saw my work, heard my music, felt my story. One evening, I walked to the park where I'd taken Michael as a child. The swings were still there, creaking in the breeze, and I sat on a bench, my journal open in my lap. I wrote about the retreat, Sophie, the women's group, the Evelyn I'd become. I am enough, I wrote the words, no longer a hope, but a truth carved deep. I thought of Michael, of the wedding, of the laughter that had once broken me. It was still there, a scar, but scars tell stories, and mine was one of strength. I didn't need their approval, their apologies, their love to be whole. I had mine, and it was enough. I decided to do something symbolic, a gesture, to mark this chapter's close. In my backyard, I planted a small tree, a dogwood, its roots shallow but strong. I placed the shell from Haven's End at its base, a gift to the earth, to the woman I'd been and the woman I was. The tree was for me, but also for Sophie, for Grace, for Clara, for every woman who'd ever been told to act her age. I watered it, my hand steady, Tom's watch, glinting in the fading light. It wasn't a grand act, but it was mine, a quiet promise to keep growing, to keep living. The fall showcase was a triumph. The center packed with art, music, and stories. My students' work shone. Sophie played a simple tune on the piano, and I performed Tide's Return. One last time, its notes a farewell to the pain of the wedding. Michael came uninvited but welcome, standing in the back, his face unreadable. Afterward, he approached, his voice low. "I'm proud of you, Mom," he said. I nodded, my heart open but guarded. "Thank you," I said, and meant it. We didn't hug, but we didn't need to. He was my son, but I was my own, and that was enough. I went to Haven's End one last time that year, staying with Marjorie, walking the beach in the cool autumn air. I didn't collect shells this time. I let the waves speak without taking from them. Marjorie hung another of my paintings in her inn, a gift I'd made for her, a woman by the sea, her face calm, her heart free. "This is you," she said, echoing her words from before. I smiled, knowing she was right. I sit here now in my kitchen, the lace curtains soft in the morning light, and I tell you this because it matters. Your worth isn't measured by who accepts you, but by how you choose to honor yourself. I planted a tree, not for them, but for me, for the Evelyn who danced, cried, painted, played, and lived. It's small now, but it will grow just as I have, just as you can. Take your shells, your songs, your storms, and make them yours. You are enough.